fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Because Progressive offers discounts for paying in full, owning a home, and more. Plus, you can count on their great customer service to help when you need it, so your dollar goes a long way. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save on car insurance. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states or situations.
Davohnte Morgan was in the process of getting his life back after a traumatic injury, but when he walked away from an argument with his girlfriend in 2020, he was never heard from again. His family wants people to keep looking for Davohnte so that regardless of the outcome, they can bring him home. I'm Charlie, and welcome to Crimelines. Hello and welcome to Crimelines. If you are a new listener, in January, I'm going to be covering a few more missing persons cases, continuing from a December series. And then in February, we're going to get back to doing a mix of topics and cases. This is not a only missing persons, only unsolved cases show. We do a little bit of everything here, but we are trying to get to 12 missing persons cases in December and January, and we are almost there because this is missing persons case number 10. We are talking about Davohnte Morgan. I have 3 main sources for this episode, and they are the main sources probably everybody uses because there is not a ton of variety in the coverage out there on the whole. So top of the list is the disappeared episode on the case. Then there is a short series called Finding Davohnte, done by journalist Anthony Carter on his YouTube channel X1 Media. And finally, we have an interview Davohnte Morgan's mother did with Jason Hebert's True Crime and Missing Persons YouTube channel. These will be linked at the sources link that is in my show notes. So today's case is going to take us out to Mt Shasta, California, which is a small town in Northern California that gets its name from a nearby volcano. Though the city itself is small, it does attract tourists, and it seems a lot of spirituality-based tourism. Mt Shasta, the volcano, was and is a sacred place for the indigenous people in the area, and it is even the source of the origin story for the Winnemem-Wintu. It has also attracted quite a number of New Age spiritualists. And it may have been some form of spiritualism that led Davohnte Morgan to being in the area. Davohnte was born in March of 1992, and he grew up in the San Francisco area with his mother and some younger siblings. This was a tight-knit, church-going family, and Davohnte loved music, and his aunt told Disappeared that Davohnte had a noticeable stutter for much of his childhood, except when he sang, which actually is not uncommon. It is an interesting insight into how the pathways in the brain are different when we talk and when we sing. Something notable is that rapping in particular can help people with stutters be more fluid in their speech because of the breath control and the rhythm. So like a lot of people with stutters, this only reinforced Davohnte's love of singing and rapping. It's clear from the family videos shown on Disappeared and the Finding Davohnte series that Davohnte loved music, he was good at it, and he really seemed to have the upbeat personality of a performer. He was really a life-of-the-party type person, and at the family events, which he rarely missed, you could see he was in the middle of the action. Life wasn't always easy for Davohnte, but because he had an upbeat attitude, it got him through pretty much everything. Until something deeply traumatic happened. In 2017, when Davohnte was 25 years old, he was sitting on the family's front porch when someone drove by and opened fire. It is believed that the shooting was a case of mistaken identity. The shooter thought he was someone else, but Davohnte was hit. He was shot in the pelvis and the hand. After he recovered physically, which is taxing enough, Davohnte found that the emotional and mental healing was harder to get to. He had just been sitting on his porch at his family home where he felt safe, and he was shot randomly. One of the biggest impacts of trauma is on that sense of security. You start to see the world as unpredictable and, as such, unsafe. Hypervigilance takes over, and even in situations where you are relatively safe, you don't feel that way because Davohnte felt safe just sitting on his porch, and he wasn't. One way Davohnte tried to cope was to try to get back to normal as fast as he could, and this is so common for people to do. You think if you can physically get back to where you were before the traumatic event happened, you're going to be able to reclaim that earlier life. And while normalcy and routine absolutely do help, it can backfire. Not only can it push down and mask emotions, if you suffered a medical or physical trauma like Davohnte did, it can actually mess up your physical healing. And that's what happened here. Davohnte did not allow himself to physically heal for long enough, and he ended up walking with a slight but noticeable limp. As Davohnte struggled to get past the psychological impact of the shooting, his family said he did start drinking and smoking pot more than he used to. And it didn't actually help, as it rarely does, so Davohnte then shifted to sobriety for a period. He started going to the gym more, hoping that would help him be healthy, both physically and mentally. As we know, a big part of getting and especially staying sober is finding people to be sober with. It is hard to say no to drinking or smoking when those around you are doing it. And that became an issue when Davohnte started dating a woman who we will call Heather in August of 2019. Most places reporting on this case do not name the girlfriend, so that is why I've changed her name here. I will be completely transparent with you. I don't know why her name's been omitted in most of the reporting. I'm quick to change a name or leave it out or just use a first name. I do not want to intrude on anyone's privacy, and I recently had this policy reinforced when I got an email from someone who was involved in a case, and they thanked me for not using their name or their child's name in my episode. But in this situation, the girlfriend has identified herself publicly on social media more than once, so I don't know why no one is naming her, but just because I don't understand something doesn't mean they're not the ones who are right. So in line with the journalistic reporting on the case, I am going to change her name. So Davohnte and the woman we are calling Heather met at a concert and started dating pretty much immediately. And unfortunately, Davohnte's family did not love Heather, which is hard when it's a close-knit family like this. But Heather was a drinker and a pot smoker, and that is not who they thought was best for Davohnte at that time because he had been working on sobriety. And, let's be honest, he was pretty new to it. Something else the family didn't really love about Heather, but they opted to ignore, was her age. She was in her mid to late 40s at the time, so she was around 20 years older than Davohnte. That said, Davohnte was a grown man. He was 27 years old and he could make his own decisions about who he dated, so the family tried to just not ruffle too many feathers about it. And honestly, it didn't look like the relationship was going to last long-term anyway because the two argued frequently and they broke up a few times in the 8 or 9 months they were together. Something I noticed in watching the interviews with the family, particularly the ones done on the Disappeared episode, was that they were trying to get to know Heather, even though they didn't click with her. The family is mainstream Christian, and Heather was very into spiritualism and New Age type beliefs. So she would talk to Davohnte's family about numerology and star charts and the power of crystals, and you can tell in these interviews that they did not understand her spiritual beliefs, but they also tried not to make a big deal out of them. They just were what they were. But those beliefs were very likely what attracted Heather to Mt Shasta in May of 2020. As we all can probably remember, this was the time of pandemic shutdowns, and California shut down hard, particularly in the cities. So getting out of the Bay Area and going to a smaller town in a more remote spot was pretty much all you could do if you wanted to get away. The family doesn't know a lot about the planning of this trip because it was never mentioned to them, and it seems like Davohnte may not have known much about the plan either. On Sunday, May 3rd, 2020, Davohnte went to a family funeral, and then that night, he called his mom from the Lake Tahoe area, nearly 4 hours away from his home. It's not clear in the reporting what phone he used to call because his own phone last pinged in the Bay Area, Oakland to be specific, earlier that day, and then it never pinged again. His family was under the impression that his phone broke that day, so he was probably using Heather's phone. According to the Finding Davohnte series, when Davohnte called, his mom asked what he was doing in Lake Tahoe, and he kind of laughed and blew off the question. The next day, Monday, May 4th, Davohnte and Heather, who were in a rental car, checked into a hotel in Mt Shasta, which is about 4 hours from Lake Tahoe. It's also just about 4 hours north of San Francisco, so it's not clear why they either drove out to Lake Tahoe first and then up to Mt Shasta, or if maybe they weren't at Lake Tahoe the night before. It's kind of confusing. You might wonder why we don't just ask Heather these questions and get them all cleared up, and the issue is that a lot of these questions have been asked of her by both the police and the family. Whether she was able to give coherent answers or not is another issue that we're going to get into. Not a lot about what she said has been made public, so all of this may have been cleared up with the police, and we just don't know. While in Mt Shasta, the two checked into the Cold Creek Inn, which is on the edge of the main part of town. And what Davohnte and Heather did while in Mt Shasta is not entirely clear. Heather told the family that they were together the entire time they were there on May 4th and then overnight into May 5th. Because Davonte's phone was broken, his brother Anthony called him on Heather's phone at some point on May 4th, and the two talked for a bit, and Davohnte seemed to be in a good mood, and he said he liked Mt Shasta. That is the last time anyone in the family heard from Davohnte. It wasn't until the next day, May 5th, that Heather started calling around to the family to let them know that she didn't know where Davohnte was. Her initial basic story that she told everyone was that she and Davohnte got into an argument. Davohnte left the hotel to go for a walk to cool down, which was something he was known to do, but then he never came back. Something I'm taking into 2026 with me is my newspapers.com subscription. And if your New Year's resolution is to join me in becoming the ultimate armchair detective, you need the ultimate archive. You already listen to the podcasts and read the books, but every true crime investigation starts with the initial reports. And in historical cases, that usually means the newspapers. So this winter, dive into a cold case you've always wanted to explore at newspapers.com. Newspapers.com lets you read the original news coverage of America's most infamous and forgotten crimes, right as the public was learning about them. I love how easy it is to search. You can search by name, date, and/or town to find articles from across the country. Whether your interest is niche, like Prohibition-era heists, or maybe you're curious about how the most notorious historical cases, like maybe the Lindbergh kidnapping, played out. Maybe you are someone who wants to dive into obscure local crimes that took over communities for a week or a month, but are now all but forgotten. Using their calendar, you can track a story chronologically from the crime scene to the courtroom and then compare those immediate reports with the history we know today. Start your deep dive now and visit newspapers.com/truecrime today. Use promo code Crimelines at checkout for 20% off your subscription. Heather did not sound worried or alarmed about how long Davohnte had been gone. She was pretty matter-of-factly saying this is what happened, so the family members she talked to also were not alarmed. The only sort of strange thing she said was what she said to Davonte's grandmother on the phone. She said something about how Davohnte was supposed to become a preacher while they were in Mt Shasta, but it all went bad and he left. Grandma had no idea what she was talking about, but like I said earlier, Heather had previously said things in relation to her religion and or spiritual beliefs that they didn't understand. So this probably fell in that category. Basically, something happened and Davohnte left Heather, and it wouldn't be the first time they had broken up. So Grandma told Heather the same thing that Davonte's brother said when she called him. Give Davohnte some space and surely he would be in contact after he calmed down. He was planning to be back in San Francisco later on May 5th for a nephew's birthday party, and he never missed family gatherings, so everyone just expected they would see Davohnte soon enough. But then, Davohnte didn't return to the Bay Area on the 5th, and he didn't contact Heather, who was still in Mt Shasta. So the next day, on Wednesday, May 6th, Heather said she went to the Mt Shasta Police Department to tell them that Davohnte was missing, but she said she did not want to file a full missing persons report because Davonte's family had told her to wait. It's not clear to me if this was true or not about the family discouraging her from filing the report, but we do know by the evening of May 6th, the family was telling her to absolutely go and file a missing persons report, which she did on the morning of May 7th. Because of how calm Heather was when she went to the police, they had a similar reaction to Davonte's family when they first found out he was missing. They thought this was just the case of a man leaving his girlfriend after a breakup. The investigator who was interviewed for Disappeared said that Heather wasn't acting concerned about Davohnte, but she was acting, in his words, loony. And that is part of the problem here. The things that Heather would say did not always make sense. But let's get into the basic story that Heather gave of what happened when she last saw Davohnte, and this is according to what was on Disappeared and in various media reports. The two of them went to bed on May 4th in their motel room, but Davohnte woke Heather up in the early morning hours of May 5th to go outside with him to smoke a cigarette. These motel rooms opened right out to the parking lot, so it's not clear why Davohnte didn't want to just stand out there and smoke alone, because he would only be feet away from Heather if he left her sleeping. But possibly this is an extension of his trauma and he just felt safer when someone was with him. Heather said she was annoyed that Davohnte woke her up, but she went outside with him anyway. Neither of them grabbed the room key, so when they shut the door, they inadvertently locked themselves out. They had to call the night manager to let them back into the room, and by this time, neither of them were in a good mood. They argued inside the motel room for a while, and Heather said she broke up with Davohnte. Like I mentioned, they were on again, off again, so this was not an unusual conclusion to their arguments. With tempers up and a 4-hour drive home together, they decided they needed some space to calm down. Heather decided to walk in one direction and go and watch the sunrise, so that would put this probably between 5 and 6 in the morning. Davohnte walked off on his own in the other direction, wearing black sweatpants, a black turtleneck, and 49ers slides. Heather said when she came back to the motel, she did see Davohnte on the other side of the street, but he still looked pretty angry, so she went into the room and let him be. That was the last time she saw him. After telling all of this to the Mt Shasta police, in a rather matter-of-fact tone, Davohnte was entered into the missing person system, and the police made a post on social media to generate any leads. But it wasn't until the next day, May 8th, when Davonte's family got into town, that the investigation really picked up intensity. And that's because the family's demeanor was the opposite of Heather's. Whereas she was calm, cool, and collected, Davonte's family was deeply worried. And they made it clear that it was not like Davohnte to walk off like that. I mean, yes, going for a walk to clear his head, but that's a 30-minute ordeal, not 3 days of no contact. In addition to talking to the police, the family also went to Heather directly to ask her some questions, and they had about the same experience as the police did. While they did get some information from her, they also got some nonsense. They said on Disappeared that it was almost like she was speaking in riddles, and they have released some of the recording Davohnte's aunt made of their conversation with Heather. Heather started talking about being in the, quote, dark places of Mt Shasta, and they asked, what did she mean by that? And Heather said it had to do with the car Davohnte was hanging around. They asked what car, and she said the RV. Davohnte was in an RV with someone. They asked who this someone was, and Heather said it was someone he had recently befriended. The family wanted some clarification on where this tip was coming from. Like, was this what the police said, or did a witness come forward? And Heather said no. She said the police were doing their boots on the ground work, and this information about the RV was what psychics had told her had happened. The family said talking to Heather only got more frustrating from there. She would talk about things like manifesting Davohnte to return and how he would come back on a certain date, and eventually the family just asked her to go home, leave Mt Shasta, and step away from being the contact point with the police. They needed to just focus on finding Davohnte, and her help was not helping. Since then, Heather and the family have mostly not had contact other than some social media back and forth, nothing positive to be sure. Heather has been pushing a theory that certain people, who she names, have kidnapped and human trafficked Davohnte. And from viewing several of her social media accounts, I have to say that I don't think Heather is necessarily a well person. There is a clear decline in her behavior and speech from older videos and posts she's put up. I'm talking like 8 to 10 years ago, and more current things. It's honestly hard to see, and I wish her wellness and clarity because 1, she deserves that life, and 2, I think if she had those things, we might have more answers as to what happened with Davohnte. There are some people who believe she has all the answers, and I don't know that, but I do think she at least has a couple more pieces to the puzzle. Instead, the family and the investigators have had to rely on things other than Heather's version of events. The police pulled security footage from around town to see if they could trace Davohnte, and thankfully they could up to a point. They don't have a lot of cameras in this small town, but he was in the downtown area, so there's the police station, a middle school, and some small businesses that do have security cameras. They first saw Davohnte walking at 9:14 on May 5th, and he walked past the police department, not quite half a mile from the motel that he and Heather were staying in. He's literally just walking. He does not look enraged or scared or intoxicated or anything like that. He looks like a tourist strolling through downtown. At one point, he crossed the street to a gas station where he made a purchase using cash, and then he left, walking back towards the motel, except, based on the cameras, he turned off the main road and then went east away from the direction he was initially headed. Maybe he was just wandering around the way you do when you're exploring a little town you've never been to before, or maybe he got turned around, or maybe he was headed somewhere else. He was never more than about a 10-minute walk from the motel, and 10 a.m. was the last time he appeared on any camera. And the police confirmed this by checking far past that point. Using 8 different cameras they had access to, they watched for 72 hours after May 5th at 10 a.m., and Davohnte never showed up again. They did have a few eyewitnesses on top of this video evidence. There was a resident who lived near the motel who said she saw a couple outside of her house arguing at 9:30 in the morning on May 5th, and she believed they were Davohnte and Heather. Heather said she did not speak to Davohnte that morning when she saw him, but based on a Disappeared episode interview with the lead investigator, it sounds like the police believe the witness and not Heather. To just lay it out there, Davohnte would have stood out. Mt Shasta's demographics in 2020, they had maybe 50 Black people living in town. So the odds that the witness saw a different couple that looked like Davohnte and Heather arguing on a random Tuesday morning during COVID lockdowns when we know Davohnte and Heather were out and about in the area, I mean, it seems very unlikely it could have been anyone else. The next witness was a mailman who said he saw Davohnte between 9:30 and 10 walking around. The street he saw him on has been confirmed by video to be where Davohnte was walking at that time, and again, Davohnte stood out in this predominantly white town. The mailman said Davohnte asked for directions to a hotel on Alma Street, but there isn't a hotel on Alma Street. The mailman told Davohnte that, but said that there was actually an apartment complex there, and he gave him directions. The mailman later saw Davohnte on Alma Street, but he wasn't near the apartment, so he assumed he must have gotten turned around. He stopped to point Davohnte in the right direction and then moved on. Later, he passed Davohnte yet again on a different road nearby, and this area is just on the other side of the commercial downtown area. It is pretty much just houses. The mailman did not stop this time, and that was the last he saw of Davohnte. It would make sense if Davohnte was in a residential area that he didn't appear on camera again, because really the only cameras in this town were in the downtown area. There was one other sighting that was not mentioned in the disappeared episode, but it was reported on in the early days of the investigation. It has since completely dropped from the narrative, so I have to assume that means they ruled it out. A pastor from a local church was at a gas station, and he said he gave a man resembling Davohnte a ride to Weed, California, about 15 minutes north of Mt Shasta. The time frame and location matched when Davohnte was at the gas station, but we know he kept walking around because he was seen on other cameras. And it looks like search efforts were focused on Mt Shasta and not Weed, so I don't know how this fits into the overall timeline or if it just doesn't. As far as searches of the area, I want to first acknowledge that the Mt Shasta Police Department is small. They pretty much have one officer on duty at a time, so they called in the county sheriff's search and rescue to run a search from the area Davohnte was last seen on camera, which was near the middle school, and going out from there in a mile radius using dogs. They did not find any sign of Davohnte. The family did not believe that the search that was done was thorough enough, and they did their own searches. While they did get some help from locals, they have said that they didn't find everyone in the town to be terribly supportive of what they were doing. They would put up flyers that would then be torn down, and beyond that, some family members reported that they experienced isolated incidents of overt racism while in town, which is something the investigator on the case and the city's mayor seem to be really defensive about in their disappeared interviews. I have read some viewpoints of locals posted online, and it does sound like maybe the disappeared episode played up the idea of organized white supremacist groups in the area. But the mayor and the investigator pretty much discounted that racism was an issue in Mt Shasta at all, which I don't think is accurate. I think they, like me, have had limited experience with racism in their community because they're white. It is okay to acknowledge the limits of our experience. Just because we don't see racism or we don't register what is happening at the time doesn't mean it's not happening. I really learned this online with dog whistles. So many have gone over my head, and I wouldn't even realize why people were so mad about a tweet or a post. If I was the type to engage in comment sections, I would have been the ignorant person posting, "Why are people mad about this?" As I have gotten older, I have realized it is okay to not know everything, and one of the most ignorant stances you can possibly have is to believe that just because you're not experiencing something means the people who are experiencing it are wrong. Did racism in Mt Shasta, regardless of the scale of it, have anything to do with why Davohnte went missing? Probably not. Does it have to do with why he has not been found yet? That one's a maybe. The family does worry that there was not as much interest to find him because he wasn't a missing white woman. So they took it into their own hands and did searches, both foot searches and walking around talking to people. They even went out into the woods to look for Davohnte, even though they didn't believe he would have willingly gone into the forest. He was a city guy. He did not like to venture into wilderness at all. Davohnte actually didn't like to go far from home in general. Something the family actually did like about Heather was that she got him out of his comfort zone. If it was completely up to Davohnte, he would never leave the Bay Area, but with Heather, he went to Las Vegas. He took short trips out of town, and his horizons were broadened a bit. But the idea that he would be in a brand new town and walk off into the woods was a bit too out there to imagine. The family focused more on the town by knocking on doors and stopping people to ask if they knew anything, and they did get some leads this way. One person told Davohnte's sister about a home Davohnte visited while he was in Mt Shasta, and when they went there, the family was quite surprised to learn that a family friend from San Francisco, a man named AJ, was there. They had no idea AJ was in Mt Shasta, and it seemed odd that he never reached out to them. Surely he heard Davohnte was missing, so why didn't he say something about how he was in town at the same time, or that he had seen Davohnte? AJ had a girlfriend, a woman we will call Dee, and it sounds like Davohnte and Heather visited with both AJ and Dee on May 4th while they were in Mt Shasta. The family later learned that Heather had given AJ a pair of Davohnte's shoes, so Davohnte's mom sent her husband and another relative over there to take back any of Davohnte's stuff. While there, AJ's girlfriend Dee made some comment about Davohnte being dead, but she did not elaborate. Also, according to the family, AJ admitted to them that the day Davohnte went missing, Dee and Heather left around 8 p.m. for a drive, and they didn't return for 10 hours. He said he didn't know where they went. The family felt like AJ was close to telling them more, but then Dee stopped him. And it sounds like the place that AJ and Dee were staying in Mt Shasta was searched by the police, possibly with cadaver dogs, but nothing was found, or at least nothing that has been made public. Another tip that came from the family talking to people in town was about a rumor going around. Davohnte's brother Anthony approached a man outside a fast food place and showed him Davohnte's picture. This man told Anthony he was aware of Davohnte being missing, and he had heard that Davohnte had been driven out to a rural area about 4 miles outside of town where he was robbed, stabbed, and pushed into the river. This lead was passed on to the police as well, and they went out to the area and saw nothing suspicious. On the Disappeared episode, they said that they confirmed Davohnte hadn't been out in that area, but they weren't specific on how they confirmed this. Proving a negative is pretty hard, so unless there was a camera out there that had footage they could review, I don't really imagine another way they could have so much confidence that Davohnte was never out there, or to be confident enough about it to not do a search. In addition to the family being boots on the ground with the investigation, they were also watching social media, particularly Heather's accounts. And in January of 2021, Heather posted an audio of a Zoom call she had with AJ's girlfriend, Dee. Normally, I always link my sources, but this video contains a lot of personal information on people, including reciting out full names and at least one phone number. So I believe any ethical breach surrounding the not citing of a source is the lesser of the two evils here. Based on this call, it seems obvious that Heather and Dee didn't really know each other before Heather and Davohnte went to Mt Shasta, or at least they didn't know each other well. The first real notable thing that happens on this phone call happens pretty early on. If you've ever been on a Zoom call and it's being recorded, when you get on the call, it says, "This call is being recorded." And Dee said she knew Heather was recording and asked if she was dumb because she knew what happened. Heather did not admit to knowing anything, but I will say that multiple times when Dee would start accusing Heather of knowing what happened to Davohnte, Heather would start over-talking her. But Dee did get in a few interesting comments that were pretty specific. One thing Dee said was that she wasn't going to go down for this and, quote, "You know what happened in the backyard." Heather asked what happened in the backyard, and Dee said Heather knew. She said Heather called Dee hysterical and something about the neighbors knowing something. Dee said she was trying to get Heather out of the situation, but she didn't get specific on what situation she was talking about. It is very clear that Dee was not about to be recorded saying anything too incriminating. But Heather just kept pushing. At one point, she asked Dee when she sold herself to the devil. Dee said it was when she met Heather. Heather kept going, and Dee finally said she sold herself to the devil when she helped Heather hide Davohnte's phone and cover up stuff. Heather then said something about how the police had all their Google data from wherever they went that night, and she asked what new information Dee had. Dee said, "Don't worry about it," and hung up on her. The call makes it sound like Heather and Dee know more than they have said about what happened to Davohnte, and I can't figure out why Heather posted this because she doesn't sound innocent in it, unless she just doesn't realize how it sounds to an outsider. The police told Davohnte's family that they also have been watching Heather's many social media accounts and that they have seen everything, so I know they've heard this call. It seems like they're waiting for Heather to say something that gives them a clue, because they do believe she knows more than she has told them. And they're hoping Heather will drop that information, maybe inadvertently, though it's hard to know if she's already put out the key to the case or not, because a lot of what she says doesn't make a lot of sense to anyone other than her. And that is where the case sits for now. For the last 5.5 years, the family has tried to keep Davohnte's name out there, and they do ask that people share his story so they can hopefully get some answers. At the time Davohnte went missing, he was 28 years old, 5'11", with short black hair and brown eyes. He had facial hair at the time, and he walks with a slight limp. He was last seen on camera wearing black pants, a black shirt, and 49ers slides, and Davohnte also has tattoos on both arms and his chest. If alive today, he would be 33 years old. Davohnte may also have a rental car key with him, and the police do ask that if anyone did find a key fob in the area after May 5th, 2020, that they call and report it. If you know anything at all, you can call the Mt Shasta police at 530-926-7540. This number will be in the show notes.